Hello, how are you? Well, I've already been in court, so now I'm in my traveling clothes and try to get in a march before it rains some more. By popular demand, and they don't usually get such a shout out, everybody wants to know more about the Rudy situation that they think I didn't get to say on the air, and that's true. It's a pretty complicated situation. Let me go back to how I know Rudy. He was an assistant U.S. attorney for, I don't know, maybe about a year before I became an assistant U.S. attorney. And the day I was sworn in and put in the criminal division, there were two trials starting. And one, Rudy was prosecuting a congressman, and the other was a 5-week securities fraud case. And having never tried a case before, after clerking in the U.S. Court of Appeals, they put me on the securities fraud case. And I had to argue to appear before the judge. Well, Rudy did such an examination of the congressman at the trial that he entered a plea of guilty. And those months that he was an assistant, you gain a lot of insight into how to try a case. So one evening he suggested how I might conduct an opening. We spent some time talking about it, and I thought it was useful. And we did try stuff together. And at that time, he was a Bobby Kennedy Democrat. And he had argued that Bobby Kennedy should be able to run in New York. He wasn't a carpetbagger because his family had been there. But he went to Washington and everything changed. And he came back a full-bred conservative Republican. And his mom was somewhat distressed because she didn't think of herself that way. And his dad had been an enforcer or a bagman of a low level for some mobsters. So he was always kind of running away from that. Well, when he came back to New York, I was going to D.C., and I sold him my apartment. So I thought in those days he was an exceptional individual, and he'd be a great lawyer. I thought he'd be on the court, or he would teach, or he would do any of those things. But I didn't know he was interested in politics. And he decided to carve away in the Republican Avenue in a city very strongly Democratic. Now, fast forward, his wife said that she thought he changed, his last wife. I'm not being cute here because I've been married a couple of times. That she thought he changed dramatically when he ran for president and lost, that he just couldn't recover from that. And there is some evidence that he was very different, although the seeds of his terrible personality were planted. So now let's skip over things that you know in the public to a search warrant being issued yesterday on his home and his apartment. And you may remember that if you saw the show last night, I mentioned he held up his hand and he said, everything I've done is on these phones, and I have no problem with what's on these phones, and I was directed by the president, and it's all on here, so you don't have to worry about it. I got it all here. Well, electronic devices were the object of this search warrant. Now, it does mean two things. A, the government believes there's a crime, and B, they think there's still evidence that exists at either his home or his office that is responsive in that investigation. It means he is the subject of investigation. Now, friends of mine in New York said they expected that he was going to be indicted last year, but a couple of things happened, and I made some reference to them. One was in June of 2020, the U.S. attorney was fired. And then in September of 2020, the indictment against his two Ukrainian friends was revised. They call it superseded. Now, normally when you supersede, you send out a new indictment, it gets tougher. But this one took out references to, Ukraine. It took out references to political goings-on and made them all look like business. It minimized Global Energies, which was the conduit for campaign contributions that came from people in Russia and Iraq to American politicians, which is at the heart of the campaign violations. And Rudy is both alleged to have an interest in that, to be counsel to that, and he's denied both of those things. And some of the money, who did it go to? Well, it went to a congressman in Texas, and he went and sought to have the Secretary of State Pompeo remove Yovanovitch, who was the ambassador to Ukraine, who was a person that Rudy was trying to get rid of because he interfered with Rudy's operation. So that gives you a good picture. So what do we get out of all of that? What we get out of all of that is there was an earlier search warrant during 2020, earlier than the one yesterday, during the Trump administration, while Barr, his lapdog, Trump's lapdog, was in charge of the so-called Justice Department. And they refused to let the Southern District of New York have that search warrant. My question is, was that before or after they got rid of the U.S. Attorney in June of 2020? And I haven't seen a date for that, but I think it'll be interesting. Now, between June and September, the indictment against Igor and Levis was changed, as I've already indicated, and that was filed in September of 2020. So it feels like they're cleaning things up to help Rudy. Now, appearances, sometimes there's an explanation, but given the data points that we have with Trump, I'm not sure that we have very many good data points. To make things worse for Rudy, he has no pardon, and it may be his ego thought no one will ever dare indict me, and he hasn't been indicted yet, but now a search warrant, that's a big jump. And he didn't get a pardon, and maybe Trump didn't want to give him one, because Trump supposedly didn't give one to his family either. And when accepting one is necessarily embracing the guilt for an offense, in this case, that hadn't then been charged, only rumored. Now, another issue here is spoliation, which is if there's an investigation going on, and I have evidence like the phone I held up on TV as Rudy Giuliani, then, and I destroy it, that's a separate offense. It's also a dangerous offense because, as Ari was saying last night, it could be, that information could be found in several other locations, which the government may already have. They may or may not. We'll find out. So where is Rudy? Rudy's in a place like where Cohen was, when Cohen said I'd take a bullet for Trump, and then he didn't. He came forward, and he's a solid witness for D.A. Vance across the street from the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. And that does look like it's heating up. I don't know the timetable, but there has always been concern about statute of limitations problems. So I just be very surprised if we don't see something in the next several weeks or months. Could be. The Southern District of New York, with what they've seized, that information has to be reviewed by what they call, a panel to make sure that communications are not protected by the attorney-client privilege. Now, there is no attorney-client privilege if a third person is president, say Lev Parnas, or, the congressman from Texas, or, any third party. And when we say third party, it depends on who his, quote, clients are. Are they the two characters from Ukraine? Is it Trump? I don't know. That's going to be a murky business. But they'll clear that out. Also, if you're engaged in a fraud, there is no privilege. That is to say, if you're representing a client and there's an ongoing fraud going on, that communication is not privileged. You may not be part of the crime, but what that person tells you or does that you know about is not protected. So there are rocky roads ahead for Rudy, and the fellow who's representing him is Bob Costello, whom I know from years ago. We were both in the corruption unit at the same time. He's an outstanding lawyer. I think it's a hard sell to say, how could they dare do this to Rudy, charge his home and stuff like that? We were cooperating. Well, the answer is Rudy can't find the truth. Bob Costello can, but his client has a big problem. So I think that's a pretty decent summary of where we stand. And I think it took about twice as long as I had to talk, or 3 times as long as I had to talk on the show. But I thought it was a fair summary last night. And it's always good to be with Ari. So I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.